For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Michael.
Morning. Good morning, everybody. Asia Pacific, fairly mixed this morning, the usual kind of story. What we've been hearing over the weekend is some slightly more positive noises about the US debt ceiling discussions. Joe Biden has exited G7 and is on his way back to start discussions about that once again. China has kept its main lending rate unchanged, but it's also cracked down on sales of Micron semiconductors. Now, Micron is based in Idaho in the United States, but 25% of its business is in China. This is the ongoing thing of the trade war between the US and China. Last year, of a total of $30 billion worth of revenue, 25%, as I say, came from China. The US is saying, as far as the security concerns, this is what it's all about. No basis, in fact, at all. As far as the G7 is concerned, therefore, ending as it did in Hiroshima, apposite, of course, that was the first target of the atomic bomb, the Second World War, the other one, Nagasaki. But the message really, apart from Zelensky, which I'll come on to in just a second, but the main message was there's going to be no decoupling from China. In the words of the communique, there will be a sort of enjoining, a de-risking and a diversification of various supply chains and so on, which China tends to dominate right now. So no decoupling, but a fairly they hope for some kind of coexistence. I come on to President Zelensky. Now, he was quite important because he managed to go at exactly the right time. What I was saying about all this is that normally everything in G7 is very, very stage managed and so on. And the Sherpas, the civil servants of each country, actually put together what the agenda is going to be. But Zelensky kind of jumped in on that, and he was able to talk to the presidents of India and Brazil about what was happening in Ukraine. And it won't have escaped his attention, of course, that the BRICS conference, which includes those two countries, begins later this year. So very important that he was able to talk to both those leaders there. As far as the United States is concerned, so all the chatter really about maybe some kind of solution happening to the US debt ceiling discussions which are taking place right now. Futures have fallen very, very slightly. Shares, they're talking about it as they're continuing to grind higher, is how they put it right now. And an S&P estimate from Bank of America from 4,000 to 4,300 by the end of the year. World Trade Organization and Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala has been, as president of it, has been saying that supply chains need to diversify much more than they are at the moment. There doesn't want to be an over-concentration of supply depending upon China, and manufacturers in all sorts of countries need to recognize this. I'm sure they do already, but she just wanted us to underline that. As far as the United Kingdom is concerned, the Bank of England is looking forward to inflation. The headline rate actually falling to round about 8.4%. That's on Wednesday. Energy costs fall out of that. It's expected that might soften the wage price spiral that's happening right now in this country. That is the hope of the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey, but we'll see. And more of that really on Wednesday. That's when we actually get those results, which I'll bring to you. As far as the opposition is concerned, Sir Keir Starmer is promising to get the NHS, as he puts it, back on track. He wants to reduce heart disease and stroke disease by 25% in 10 years, and also the time it takes to get into accident emergency wards via ambulances and all the rest of it. This is a major industry turnaround for him. I don't think it'll just be about money. It should be about increasing efficiencies, but we'll hear more about that today. And as far as Rolls-Royce engineering is concerned, the relatively new Tufan Eganbiljik, who is the relatively new boss of that, has been talking about gross mismanagement in all regions of Rolls-Royce Aerospace. The power division, the continuing rumours about that spinning off. That's 26% of their revenue, and he's put new heads of defence and also aerospace in that company to try to make it work. Finally, commodities, oil, basically. Very, very, very patiently watching what's happening as far as the world economy is concerned, not convinced about a continuing recovery in China. And gold, it's stopped short of its record levels on slight optimism about the debt ceiling, but any bad news, and of course, the price of gold increases because it's seen as a safe haven. That's the global view.
Let's talk about this mismatched rent in Rolls-Royce. This was a phenomenal British company that a lot of people have looked at and says, goodness me, you can almost as good as take the Rolls-Royce engine to the bank because of the level of precision. But when you hear about this shenanigan going on in Rolls-Royce, only to think Rolls-Royce was a British company touted to be part of the AUKUS deal, what is really going on? How are the mighty fallen to be able to hear this happen in Rolls-Royce in the first place?
Let's make sure we're talking about the right company. This is Rolls-Royce Engineering, not Rolls-Royce Cars. Rolls-Royce Engineering, yes, of course it has, and many, many people, even as we speak, and no doubt depending upon the power and the reliability of those particular aero engines. The power division, again, that's slightly separate, but as far as the aerospace is concerned, those engines really only make money when the planes are actually in flight, because that's how the pricing of them goes. And because of the lack of flights during the pandemic, I'm reading a lot into this. I suspect that's probably where, like most aero engine manufacturers, that Rolls-Royce fell short. But there's no question that this new guy going in there is going to shake it, grab it by its tails and shake it upside down and redo it. Whether or not it succeeds, down to the aero industry. All I can say is, if you believe in the aero industry, you're seeing Ryanair coming up with record profits today. That's the cheaper side of things. EasyJet did last week. You're seeing more and more people flying first and business class. And also what you're seeing is, I don't know what it's like in Nigeria, but certainly in the UK, the vast majority of, according to surveys, disposable income is spent on travel and will be spent on travel. And we're seeing that more and more now. So I would expect aerospace to do reasonably well.
All right, so Cyberspace Administration of China, CAC, have said, like you mentioned, that the biggest microchip makers in America, Micron, pose a national security risk and have imposed a sanction. This, as you said, the trade war between Washington and Beijing. However, why is Washington upset? They have, prior to this, imposed a number of sanctions on chip makers in China. And so were they not expecting a retaliation like this from China, and perhaps in the next few days, even more from China, as they have done, to businesses in China?
Well, you've summed it up. I mean, so what we're seeing is retaliation, and he who retaliates, or he or she retaliates last, retaliates best, and there'll be another retaliation, no doubt, from the United States as well. They've been very hot on TikTok. They've been very hot on Huawei, as we know, as has the UK. This is the next stage down the line, but continuing with trade war rather than outright war is probably slightly better. It's not perfect, but it does show, does it not, that the world, as the G7 and as the president of the WTO was saying only over the weekend, she was actually saying that the world. This is in Konjo Iweala, your Nigerian person who's in charge of all this. She's actually saying that supply chains need to be diversified. And I think what she is actually saying is absolutely right. And I think what this is a further example of that.
Well, at the end of the G7 meeting, the communique indicated that the G7 countries are taking a common approach towards China because they say China poses a risk to global economy. In what way specifically does China pose a threat to the global economy? And then, of course, the talks will continue today between House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and President Biden, who has just returned from the G7. Any indication of how that meeting today is likely to go, or whether the matter will be resolved.
The most important thing out of this meeting, I feel, it's not what you're reading in the headlines. Here's what I think is the most important thing. It's what price the Republicans actually will ask for to get agreement on this, because it's an annual pantomime. It happens every year. It happens to have gone beyond where it normally extends. Normally these things, but what price? And will it be anything? Will Ukraine feature in that? That seems to me to be the most important thing. Yes, we've had all the warnings from the UK Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen about what the problems for the world economy and the US economy. We understand that. I mean, that doesn't take. What I think is really interesting is what the Republicans will actually do, what kind of price they will exact about this, and whether or not that extends to defence. And if it does, then I think the war in Ukraine could go very, very differently. That I think is the most important thing as far as a bystander is concerned.
But I also ask, how exactly does China distort the global economy? Because as is claimed by the G7 countries.
I personally. So what we've heard are, there are a number of things. We don't know what happens in China because it's an authoritarian regime. So we've got no idea whether or not Huawei, TikTok, and the rest of it cause a security problem as far as handling data is concerned. And this is why China has therefore stopped buying some of Micron's products, simply to retaliate against that for what they describe as security concerns. My personal view about it all is we are independent. We need their deflation, their cheaper products, in the same way that they need our intelligence, and by our, I mean the Western world, by imports to China to keep it going. There are big questions about China right now, and one of them, which is being voiced over the weekend, and it's going to get a larger voice, is actually is there a recovery in China right now? Is it actually recovering from the lockdown? I mean, there have been signs and so on, but how do we know it's recovering? That's what is still mystifying people as they go on. That's where the problem is. If you want to know what the big thing stopping the world is about China, it's the question mark. What is going on? That seems to me to be it.
Well, thank you very much, Michael.